Hello once again. Super Mario Carl here with the fifth and final part of the All Tomorrow's reading as part of Story of the Century. Well, it's been a good run with everyone. I appreciate every view, every comment, every like, and every subscription. It means a whole lot to me, and I just hope that this story and this community have meant a little bit to you. Well, without further ado, let's get reading. Machine invasion. It took a long time for the Gravital to prepare. Propulsion systems were perfected and new bodies capable of withstanding the interstellar jumps were devised. But when they finally decided that the time was nigh, nothing survived the slaughter. The invasions followed a brutally simple plan. The target world's suns were blockaded and their light was trapped behind specially constructed million-mile sails. If the dying worlds managed to resist, an asteroid or two finished them off. Enormous invasion fleets were built, but it was rarely necessary to deploy them. The machines had caught their cousins completely off guard. The great dyings, all of which occurred in a relatively quick 10,000-year period, stretched the boundaries of genocide and horror. Almost all of the new human species, unique beings who had endured mass extinctions, navigated evolutionary knife edges, and survived to build worlds of their own, vanished without a trace. Even the coup had been loyal to life. They had distorted and subjugated their victims, but in the end they had allowed them to survive. To the machines, however, life was a luxury. Such thorough ruthlessness was not, ironically, born out of any actual hatred. The Gravital, long accustomed to their mechanical bodies, simply did not acknowledge the life of their organic cousins. When this apathy was mixed with the unsane claims as the sole heirs of the Starmen, the extinctions were carried out with the banality to say, an engineer tearing down an abandoned building. Under the reign of the machines, the galaxy entered a brand new dark age. A rare instance of a direct invasion by the machines on one of the shore cities of Killerfolk. Most of the time, the inhabitants of the Second Empire were wiped out globally without the necessity of such confrontations. When considering the invasion, the machine invasion brought on the greatest wave of extinctions the galaxy had ever seen, for it was not a simple act of war by one species against another, but a systemized destruction of life itself. When considering such a vast event, it is easy to get lost in romantic delusions. It is almost as easy to write off the Gravital as evil, as it is to consider an entire episode as a nihilistic end of everything kind of scenario. Both of these approaches are, as they would be in any historical situation, monumental fallacies. To begin with, the Gravital were not evil, at least not to their own perception. These beings, although mechanical, still lived their lives as individuals and operated inside coherent societies. They had surrendered their organic heritage but their minds were not the cold, calculating engines of true machines. Even after giving orders that would destroy 1 billion souls, the Gravital would have a home to go to, and, as incredibly as it might sound, a family and a circle of friends, towards which it felt genuine affection. Despite being endowed with compassion, their harsh treatment of the organics was the result of, as mentioned before, a simple inability to understand their right to live. Furthermore, the Gravital did not constitute a single individual whole, whose entire purpose was to wreck the universe. True, their technological advancement had allowed them to form a pangalactic entity, but within itself the machine empire was divided into political factions and even religious faiths. Superimposed over these fault lines were the daily lives of their personal affairs of families and individuals. Like any sentient beings, they had a sense of identity, and thus differing agendas. Nor did the machine invasion mean the end of everything. There certainly was a widespread destruction of life, but what was lost was only organic life, consuming energy, directing it for reproduction, thought, and even evolution. The machines were as alive as any carbon-based organism. Despite the turnover, life of a sort survived and would be seen, even preserved some of its organic predecessors. Subjects, many descendants of the bug-facers. The bug-facers, radically shy and xenophobic due to their background of repeated alien invasions, became the first species to face the gravital onslaught. As ironic as their fate seemed, the bug-facers were the luckiest of the post-humans. Instead of being exterminated like the rest of their cousins, they survived as the only organic beings in the machine empire. The main reason for their retention remain unknown to this day. Perhaps the machines hadn't perfected their ruthless apathy by then, or perhaps they pitied the poor organics and allowed them to maintain a stunted parody of an existence. Whatever the reasons, the bug-facers endured, but they hardly resembled their original ancestors anymore. Genetic engineering, the lost art of galaxy-threading coup, and later the tool breeders as well, was mastered almost as comprehensively by the machines, not hesitating to warp the beings which they did not really consider to be alive. They spliced their ways into the bug-facer DNA, producing generations of literal abominations. Would a woman or man of today show any apprehension towards reassembling a computer or even recycling trash? Such was the attitude of a triumphant gravital. Thus the multitudes of subjects were produced, distorted to such an extent that even the meddling of the coup seemed comparatively timid. Most of them were used as servants, caretakers, and manual laborers. These were the lucky forms. Some submen were reduced to the levels of cell cultures, useful for only gas exchange and waste filtering. Others were molded into completely artificial ecologies, baroque simulations that served only as entertainment. Some machines, with their still human ambitions, took this practice into a new level and produced living works of art, doomed one-off creatures who existed almost purely as biological anachronisms. Be it as a tool, slave, or entertainment, humanity narrowly held on to its biological heritage, while its machine cousins reigned supreme for an unbelievable 50 million years. The bug-facer archetype, flanked by two of its twisted descendants, to his left a phallus-bearing polydactyl Bered as a sacrificial offering in one of the many different machine religions. To the right a one-off work of art, designed to play its modified fingers like a set of drum while ululating the tunes of a certain pop song. The other machines. Recall that despite its galaxy-cradling might, the machine empire was not homogeneous. It contained dozens of differing factions that did not always agree on everything, including the treatment of their downtrodden biological subjects. Some machines, over a process involving several religious, social, and philosophical doctrines, began to comprehend the universality of life and the common origins of organic and mechanical humanities. Initially, such individuals lived in seclusion or withheld their beliefs from the world. They secretly engineered lineages of subjects that could live, move, and think freely as they could. In a few memorable instances, the engineers fell in love with their creations, and their martyrdom inspired other machines to think just a little differently. Eventually, the ideology gained enough momentum to be practiced openly in everyday life. However, the sect of toleration soon ran into odds with their hardline pan-mechanical rivals. The seething intolerance between the two factions finally broke with some tolerant machines wanted to set several worlds aside for the unrestricted enjoyment of biological life. All hell broke loose, and the machine empire, the apparently seamless monolith of the galaxy, experienced its first short and bitter civil war. The war did not cause any lasting damage, but it plainly illuminated one fact. The greatest entity in the galaxy had ever seen was not without its problems. The fall of the machines, return of the spacers. In the longer run, the internal struggles of the machine empire just might have led to its downfall, but there was no need to wait that long, as the empire died a shorter but immensely more cataclysmic death. For a long time, the machines and the asteromorph empires had been eyeing each other nervously. They hadn't yet run into other open confrontations, as the asteromorphs kept mostly to their outer space arcs, and the machine empire occupied the planets. In almost every inhabitable solar system of the galaxy, the same upside-down tension built up between organic beings living in the void and machines inhabiting perfectly terrestrial worlds. Power was evenly balanced between the two rival empires. Moreover, this balance involved forces strong enough to destroy even planets en masse. Each side knew that any kind of war would result in mutual annihilation, and only insanity could start such a conflict. Well, the post-Civil War empire of the machines did go insane. In a sense, in order to divert attention from internal struggles, it needed a new enemy to consolidate its rival factions against. How unwise this enemy came to be the asteromorphs. It is unnecessary and nearly impossible to describe the carnage that followed. The conflicts lasted anywhere up to a few million years, and the resulting loss of life, both mechanical and organic, made the initial machine genocide seem irrelevant. When the cosmic dust settled, the winners displayed themselves. The conquerors were the asteromorphs, changed beyond recognition after 50 million years of continual self-perfection. Their grossly hypertrophied brains stretched out like wings on either side, and their finger-derived limbs had formed an intricate set of sails and legs, endowed with superior technology and limitless patience. These beings almost completely destroyed the machines, despite losing a substantial number of their own species. The conflict also thrust the asteromorphs into the affairs of their long-neglected human cousins. As impossible as it seemed, some of the machine's subjects had survived the ordeal. Now the asteromorphs could no longer look away. With the machines gone, it was up to the asteromorphs to clean up after them. They took up the subjects and used their genetic heritage to populate entire planets. During the Age of Reconstruction, which lasted for another 2 million years, many asteromorph world builders emerged as true gods, creating inhabited worlds almost out of scratch. Their subjects, meanwhile, became the inheritors of a truly new, war-torn phoenix of a galaxy. The post-war galaxy. When replenishing lost worlds, the asteromorph gods also took measures to ensure the continued safety of their creations. The abrupt rise of the machines had shown that, unless carefully regulated, the wealth of the stars could always host a race of pan-galactic usurpers. The asteromorphs, watchful but ever transparent, did not want to interfere directly. Instead, they produced terrestrial versions of their own kind to regulate the galaxy. They adapted their delicate, ethereal fingers into spidery limbs, and shrunk their brains considerably to readjust to the vigors of gravity. The resulting sideline was stunted by asteromorph standards, but it still produced demigods in every sense of the word. These beings, often known as the terrestrial spacers or simply the terrestrials, nurtured and controlled the development of post-war civilizations on many planets. They acted as caretakers, prophets, kings, and emperors, but also as grim reapers as the occasion dictated. The endeavor did not always proceed as smoothly as planned, of course. Most of the time, the newborn races refused to heed their mentors, in several cases, even rebelled against them. Needless to say, this crime was always punished with swift extinction. Furthermore, even the terrestrials grew corrupted. Instead of offering guidance, terrestrials on many planets simply played God, weaving contrived religions around themselves to shamelessly exploit their subjects. It was not ethical or even productive, but this method seemed to guarantee more stability than actually trying to bring up new races. This way or another, organic sentience reclaimed its dominance in the galaxy. The new empire, maintained by the terrestrials, populated by myriad descendants of the subjects, and overseen ultimately by the omniscient asteromorphs, achieved greater progress and a longer lasting calm in the galaxy than all of its predecessors combined. A new terrestrial shows a slightly divergent yet still bizarrely human anatomy, and that is the characteristic of its species. These particular terrestrials maintain a religious hegemony over their clueless subjects, dressing up in elaborate veils and headgear to assert their divine inheritance. The new machines. Long after their fall from grace, the machines still clung on to existence. During the initial aftermath of the war, the asteromorphs had planned to exterminate every last one of them, only to discover that the machines were simply too useful to destroy. For millions of years, they had perfected the interface between mind and machine to such an extent that they could live and operate in the most inhospitable conditions. Such beings, deprived of the galaxy-straddling power, would make invaluable contributions to research and exploration in the new empire. There was a sense of poetic justice in all this. The machines, who once distorted biological life forms to their whims, were finally treated to a similar fate. To begin with, the asteromorphs completely scrapped their ability of self-contained gravitational manipulation, the very force that had rendered them invulnerable in the first place. They were given finite lifespans and slightly numbed imaginations, so that history would not repeat itself. The degradatory nature of these changes, however, did not imply an overall regression. Unlike their ancestors, the new machines were endowed with nanotechnological bodies that could remodel themselves continuously, which means that they could come in every shape and size imaginable, and then some that could not. A machine citizen could live for some time in the void of the space, conducting research, and then transform into a completely different body plan for a holiday on a cometary halo, tropical jungle, or a methane ocean. He or she would also make the trip personally by growing temporary hyperdrives and ramjet engines. Despite their breathtaking versatility, the machines were never as common or prominent, even after completely accepting their role as lowly citizens of the new empire. The greatest wars in conceivable history had ingrained the organics with too deep a mistrust of their mechanical neighbors, and the new machines were always treated with a degree of discrimination. The sins of their father had come to shackle this most splendorous of all human species. A machine citizen of the new empire, she sports a dazzling pair of branching arms that suit both the latest fashion trends and her job as an artisan. Machines following fashions might seem unusual to a reader of this era, but never forget that these beings are human intelligences, only in different bodies. Second contact. With successive waves of machine-aided discovery and colonization, the new empire grew exponentially. Such was the growth of wealth and progress that its description would need the use of concepts that remain unexplored today. To talk to a man of today about the comings and goings of the new empire would be akin to giving lectures of 20th century geopolitics to a hunter-gatherer. This magnificent entity was not blind to the universe around it. It tuned in its eyes, ears, and sensors, and probed the events of the surrounding galaxies. The New Galactics suspected that the surrounding nebulae might also have their indigenous folk, and it was also wise to contact them before a misunderstanding or a conflict could occur. On a darker side, these observations also served as lookouts for potential invaders. Even then, the memory of the coup was not forgotten. The discovery was eventually made. One of the neighboring galaxies was showing patterns of activity that were unmistakable signs of a sentient organization. Some thinkers reviled in the discovery of a new civilization, while others feared the return of the coup. Fortunately, this second encounter with an alien species proved to be a peaceful one. Perhaps the intelligence of both galaxies were finally mature enough to meet without quarreling. The other galaxy was dominated by connected unions of different beings, presided over by various kinds of amphicephaly, bizarre creatures that resembled giant snakes with heads on both ends, one of which bore a secondary retractile body that it would use to interact with the world. Apparently, they had undergone alternating series of regressions, evolutionary radiations, and self-imposed genetic makeovers, just as humanity had. With all of their wild differences, the amphicephaly were welcome. They were the first, but surely not the last. An amphicephalous ambassador, typical of their kind, her strange body betrays an evolutionary history as complicated as that of humanity. Earth rediscovered. The purpose of this work is not to describe the limitless progress that followed the cross-galactic contact. One could go indefinitely chronicling how the United Galaxies re-encountered and subdued the coup, how they cradled their suns with artificial shells, multiplying their inhabitable zones a billionfold, how they crisscrossed interstellar space with wormholes and made travel a thing of the past. Ultimately, descendants of those beings even conquered time itself, prolonging the existence of their mind indefinitely via rejuvenating technologies. For a time, all men were gods. But from your vantage point, one discovery truly stood out in this orgy of advance. Compared with the gargantuan achievements like the taming of space and the construction of the star shells, it was a mere blip, a revelation of long-forgotten trivia. This was the rediscovery of Earth, the birthplace of humanity, where the omnipresent Dusteromorph, the star-gliding machine, and the millions of humble resident races could all trace their origins. It was made quietly by a single researcher combing the vestiges of forgotten history. Decade after decade, millions of years of wars, invasions, and extinctions had buried the evidence thoroughly and comprehensively. When she finally came across irrefutable evidence, nobody was around to celebrate. That would come later. By the time of Earth's rediscovery, humans had diverged considerably from their ancestral forms. Return. The discovery sparked a certain amount of interest, although nowhere as much as other breakthroughs had. To most humans of the cosmos, their ancestral birthplace was simply an interesting piece of information, a piece of trivia with which they had lost all ties. Still, a ship was sent forth, and it landed without ceremony, for now there was no intelligence left on Earth. Too far away from the main centers of population, it had been completely ignored, gone stagnant and feral, but it was still home. When the explorers stepped out, human feet trod on old Earth once more, after an absence of 560 million years. Mankind was back home. All tomorrows. I must conclude my words with a confession. Mankind, the very species which I've been chronicling, from its terrestrial infancy to its domination of the galaxies, is extinct. All of the beings which you saw in the preceding pages, from the lowly worm to the wind-riding sail people, from the megalomaniac Gravital to the ultimate galactic citizens, lie a billion years dead. We are only beginning to piece the story together. What you read was our best approximation of the truth. Why did they disappear? Perhaps it was a final, unimaginable war of annihilation, one that transcended the very meaning of conflict. Perhaps it was a gradual breakup of the united galaxies and every race facing their private and slowly end afterwards. Or perhaps the wildest theories suggest it was a mass migration to another plane of existence, a journey into somewhere, sometime, something else. But the bottom line is, we honestly don't know. Ultimately, however, what happened to humanity does not matter. Like every other story, it was a temporary one, indeed long, but ultimately ephemeral. It did not have a coherent ending, but then again, it did not need to. The tale of humanity was never its ultimate domination of 1,000 galaxies, or its mysterious exit into the unknown. The essence of being human was none of that. Instead, it lay in the radio conversation of the still human machines, in the daily lives of the bizarrely twisted bug-facers, in the endless love songs of the carefree hedonists, the rebellious demonstrations of the first true Martians, and, in a way, the very life you lead at the moment. Many throughout history were unaware of this most basic fact. The coup, in dreams of an ideal future, distorted the worlds they came across. Later on, the Gravitol, with their insane desire to recreate the past, caused the ugliest massacres in the history of the galaxy. Even now, it is sickeningly easy for beings to get lost in false grand narratives, living out completely driven lives in pursuit of non-existent codes, ideals, climaxes, and golden ages. In blindly thinking that their stories serve absolute ends, such creatures almost always end up harming themselves, if not those around them. To those like the misguided, look at the story of man and come to your senses. It is not the destination, but the trip that matters. What you do today influences tomorrow, not the other way around. Love today and seize all tomorrows. The author, with a billion-year-old human skull. Well, there we go. That was a complete reading of All Tomorrows by Nemo Ramjet, that being the author, the alien documenting humanity, not the actual real author. I don't remember his name at the moment, but I will remember he's from Turkey. Well, thank you, author, for giving us an excellent story, very interesting, with beautiful illustrations and something a little different than we may be used to. And it's these past 2 years have been quite a big deal for all of us. Many changes, for better and for worse. Well, I truly appreciate everyone for watching. Thank you very much. And if you want to see more of me, hear more of this reading voice, then be sure to subscribe, and I'll await to see you once again in the comments or maybe other ways. Well, have a great one.